morning, everyone. Welcome to HogvilleNET YouTube Live Thursday morning. We are just hours after the deadline for NBA draft entries who still had college eligibility to withdraw from the draft if they intended to return to school. And we saw several names, frontline names of guys returning, players we've been talking about over the last several days, weeks actually, just kind of watching their process. We know that Arkansas is now up to 8 scholarships. John Calipari has been talking about 8 or 9 guys on his roster and leaving it that. He clarified for the first time beyond stopping at 8 or 9. He clarified additional information at SEC spring meetings yesterday on Wednesday. So we're going to talk a little bit about that after we talk about available players, some other comments about Arkansas' schedule, and in addition to comments he made about what he's trying to finish the roster out with. We've been saying for a while we identified several positions of need. Even while we waited for two weeks for DJ Wagner's private commitment to be finally leaked public, that a lead guard with experience, DJ Wagner checked that box. Okay, so that got Arkansas to 8 scholarship players signed and ready to go. But if you're going to 9 preferred type players, we were also identifying the biggest need would be another front court option, preferably a versatile four spot, a forward that could be interchangeable and actually help you at the 5, but primarily as a 4 to complement the 5 spot guys that Arkansas has. And Arkansas's got some good ones, and Jonas Adu and Big Z. All right. So we talked about that need. Another need being maybe another perimeter player, maybe a big wing that was a shooter, an efficient volume shooter from 3 that could maybe play a little small ball 4 for you in smaller lineups. But it seemed to me the more pressing need was, for the time being, for certain, would be a front line piece. Again, a 4. And so when we looked at this deadline yesterday, when I came on at 7 a.m., the first names we talked about guys that had decisions to make was Coleman Hawkins. And when I've been giving you source information from his representation going back to last week, stating that his odds of staying in the draft were 75-25 that he would stay in. This is on the heels of the player himself during the draft combine a week earlier saying publicly it was 90-10. Another source from the NBA scouting corps told me that the player told him face-to-face, I'm not going back to college. All right, what we talked about yesterday when we went through all of this was that Coleman Hawkins is applying for jobs. He has to say, I'm ready for this job market. He has to put all his chips on the table. And I compared it yesterday morning at this time to like a politician running for president, let's say, and they jump in the primaries and there's 12 or 14 of them, and they maintain, no matter what the polls say, no matter how far, I'm in it for the long haul. And then at some point reality kicks in and they've got no more wiggle room, and they bail out and they start thinking about the future. This is similar in a sense of the players are going to go all in if they're trying to get to the pro level on getting there. But at some point, there's a reality that it's just not there. And because of NIL and some of these big paydays, it makes it even more enticing to return to school now, because effectively you're weighing that option in your professional considerations as well, because you can make money. And so with Coleman Hawkins, it was always, when you looked at his draft combine performances, it was mixed. When you looked at, the fact that he was going to be visiting and having individual workouts with teams and meeting with teams, that's not unusual. That doesn't telegraph that he's about to be selected in the draft. There are guys that are going to settle for, because they think it's their best option, going in knowing they're going to be on a 2-way deal with a chance to prove themselves. But with NIL and some of the quality of players that were in this process, it makes it even more viable to return to college. So we're starting to see a shift in that landscape of guys not staying in. Coleman Hawkins is the most recent. When we talked about this yesterday, I went back through all those odds I just mentioned that source information was coming from, and I said, but I think the door is more than just cracked for a return. I think it's much more ajar than that, and there's a bigger opening for him to return. So after we had the 7 a.m. yesterday, after we had our HogvilleNET YouTube Live yesterday, through the day I was reaching out to his representation. They were very busy. So I'm going to give you some information you won't necessarily get anywhere else. I haven't seen it. Just from his process yesterday, there were a couple of teams going into the late hours yesterday evening that they were still trying to negotiate some kind of draft guarantee beyond a 2-way deal. because a two-way just won't sniff what he probably can garner on the NIL market as a returnee, because big men, quality frontline pieces are a premium, whether it's early in the portal process, midway, or where we're at now. Okay, still negotiating with a couple of teams. And the percentage I got was the same midday yesterday, 75-25, that he's going to stay in. That just shows you how they're all in it until there's nowhere else to go except back to school. And so you wonder, with this price tag that's emerged. Now, this same source has told me several things. Some of this information you'll find out there. One reporter said that the price tag was $2 million. And it was almost like an infomercial on the tweet. It's a national reporter. And it was almost like an infomercial. If you're not willing to negotiate at that price tag, don't bother calling. So it was informative reporting, I guess, but it was also like an infomercial. But the representation source told me, look, his price tag if he came back to school was always $1.5 to $2 million. Okay, so maybe there's a lower watermark that they're willing to go to the table with as an initial, offering, 1.5 to 2 million. That's a different range. It's not quite 2 million. We know Great Osabor just prized $2 million. So there has been some market established for big men, quality big men, if you look at just that one example. Is Coleman Hawkins worth $2 million of NIL money for anybody? How desperate does a team need to be? I don't know. The value's based on what teams think they need and what they're willing to pay. I know Arkansas passed on a couple of frontline options because the NIL valuations were not where the Hogs thought that player should be and what their plans were. So they moved on. One of them was effectively a catch and release. The other one never made it to campus because Arkansas kept holding it off. Player that wanted to commit and get to campus, but Arkansas made choices there. John Calipari. Okay, would we see a similar situation here where what is the real range that the player is willing to take? This is all part of negotiations as far as I'm concerned. This same source, this represented source, Hawkins' representation told me that he's wide open. All the schools that need a big man, he's open to. All right. That's a natural thing to say. I have another source that said, look, Arkansas is right in the thick of the mix here. And depending upon what Calipari wants to do, they think Arkansas would be the front runner. The representation wouldn't go that far and say that. And that makes sense because they're saying, look, we're wide open. And it's not the best way to open up negotiations saying, yeah, we want to go here. You got to leave it wide open because that's your best way to, I guess, drive up your amount. So I think Arkansas, we've heard for a while, Arkansas would be at the top of the leaderboard somewhere there. North Carolina's been in play. We talked yesterday about Ugonna Onyenso, who played for Cal for 2 years at Kentucky, the 7-footer. He also withdrew from the draft. And what's important there is that's another big man option for other teams, for teams that are still trying to fill out their front line. So does that complicate things or help matters for a program like Arkansas? When it comes to Calipari, I always see him as not waiting around to see what other teams get or, this helps us. He's going to go after the prime cuts regardless. And so does that change anything in terms of how it would impact Arkansas? That I don't know. But it may be one of those things where if you're in a bargaining war with another team, again, Arkansas's got to set a bar for where it thinks the value is there. At this stage in the game, are you desperate to a point where you would overpay? I don't think so. So I said all that to say I don't think Arkansas is going to overreach for this player at this point any more than it did before. And you can't look at the clock right now and say, well, it's slim pickings. You ought to do it. Not necessarily. There's other options out there that may not be, he may be the top name on the board right now, but there's some other good players that are in the mix here. And so, some of this information, again, going through his process, it was interesting. I think it was around Central Time. It was around 8:40, 8:45 last night when he finally made the announcement that he was withdrawing from the draft, and that started to come out. Basically, whatever the negotiations were with the two NBA teams up to that point didn't land where they wanted it to. And to me, if you're getting a draft guarantee beyond a two-way deal, that means you're going to be not only draft selected, But then you're going to have at least, I mean, typically players are wanting 2 years guaranteed money. However, that's chopped up. And you see guys going in the 40s, even 50s that sometimes get that. And so it's not necessarily about where you're picked, but who are the teams that are willing to do that? To me, this is pretty clear that he was not able to secure something on that level, because even if he can get 2 million on this level, you'd already be into your pro career. You're out of school. You can focus strictly on basketball, and you're going to get something comparable. And you're probably at that point, if you're agreeing to it, getting something for 2 years, and now you're even closer to that next contract. This is not about coming back and really with a viable path to improve your draft stock for a guy like Coleman Hawkins, because he's a 4-year guy. He's a known commodity. There's a chance he can improve it by just being an All-American and having a wild season, but by how much? Because again, you're still, you're older. They've seen your flaws. Even if you show levels of improvement or stat improvement, it doesn't mean that you're raising the bar significantly in your draft stock. However, if you're staring at a two-way deal and you can make a million plus on an NIL deal, for one more year, you can be right back in the same situation you're in now, a year from now, with more money than you would have made if you'd have jumped into the pro game. All right, spent a lot of time there on Coleman Hawkins. We'll see what happens, but I wanted to give you some of that intel about the range. Maybe is 1.5 million too out of the gates. How much is that negotiable? How much is he willing to go down on that? Because if none of the schools that are in play are willing to go there, he's kind of out of options on that part of it. He's going to have to get somewhere with it and find a spot. I mentioned yesterday, could Illinois be even a possibility? He said he's not going to play in the Big Ten anymore. Said he wouldn't be returning to Illinois. Players say a lot of things. Seems very unlikely that that's even a possibility. And when you talk about schools that still need bigs out there, I mentioned North Carolina. There are other schools that could potentially be in play for him. So again, it's going back to price tag. Someone said he could always play an Isaiah and go back in. I guess that's true. There is a deadline to withdraw from the draft, not to return to school, but the NBA has its own deadline. So I guess I don't know. There's also a deadline to get in. I believe there's a deadline. I didn't check that before I came on to go back through that. You have to remember when Isaiah Joe did that, it was during COVID, and all the deadlines were changed, and they added an extra deadline because of the COVID situation. But there may still be a way to get back in there and play that angle. So if there is wiggle room for him there, this could also be a situation where he's still trying to figure out which angle's better, college or pro. But to me, it seems like he will get more NIL money. To me, it's obvious than he could command on a two-way deal, because that has limits for anybody. It doesn't matter the player. At that point, you're negotiating with the team. If you're looking at two-way, how are you really going to use me? How many opportunities are you going to make sure I get playing in the NBA so that I can actually elevate that amount that I will get paid? Because the number of games you actually play, or you're on the active roster in NBA for NBA games, it increases what your total amount would be. But there is a cap to it, and it doesn't reach 1 million. So he probably can make double or more. If you're talking about 2 million, almost 3 times more than he can max out on a two-way deal. All right, we've started with Coleman Hawkins. Let's just remind everybody: 6'10", versatile forward, 12 points per game, 6 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.1 blocks. Shot 45% from the field last year, 34% from three on volume, and a 79.5% free throw shooter. Checks a lot of boxes. Really good player. Improved. Had his best season last year. And what I like about him is he is a perfect response to what Arkansas needs on the front line, because he's got at 6'10". He not only brings height, length. He's a veteran savvy player at this point. He's versatile. He can play facing up. So he can complement your 5-spot guys in Jonas Adu and Big Z. He also gives you much needed depth. You don't really have a true 4 when you look at Big Z and Jonas Adu. 5s typically, maybe they could share some time on the court together. I don't know. That'd be an experiment more than something that looks like it makes sense. And then you've got Adu Thero, the Kentucky transfer. He'll be a junior, 2 years under Cal at UK. 6'8", still growing. 220 to 230, sturdy guy, but he's a tweener, 3-4, kind of a, can play the wing, can maybe help you at the four. But without another frontline piece, he's going to be playing a lot of time at the four, and you may not be able to exploit all that versatility. And I think then you're thin on the front line, and you don't have a true, to me, a true 4-5 combo, which you would have in Coleman Hawkins, who can help at the five if needed. So to me, Coleman Hawkins, or maybe it's somebody else, but it starts with him. He's the top name out there, and we've been saying for a while we think he'd be a great fit. All right, 15 plus minutes in. I want to thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We're going to go through some more names here that some of it we've talked about, some decisions that were made yesterday, guys coming back. We'll talk a little bit about Calipari's comments on the, not only on this, how he sees the roster and what walk-ons mean, and some scheduling stuff, but also, if you haven't already hit subscribe, like, share, all those things, please do so. We appreciate it. All right, jumping back in here, I'm going to put out my recruiting tracker update here after I finish this today. And I've already got it ready, but I want to do this first and then embed the YouTube. But one of the things I'm going to do is I've kind of put in order the remaining players that have made decisions to leave the pros, the NBA draft process, and come back to school. And I've numbered them 1 through whatever. And it started with Coleman Hawkins. The second name I have on it's Trevor Brazile. I started talking about this yesterday. And the reason I do this is just from a positional value standpoint, for starters, of who's remaining at 6'10" with 7'4" wingspan. He would fit that versatile four that can play facing up. He's got incredible athletic and measurable attributes. He has performed at a high level in big games at times, and he could also help you, if you had to, could help you with minutes at the five. There's enough there that they're there just on the court and what he brings physically. He's got to get stronger. He's got to play. He's got to improve on how he deals with things defensively. But there are certain things there that I like. He's already familiar. He's been at Arkansas for the last 2 years. Look, the guy's only played 35 games, effectively one season at Arkansas when you look at the number of games. Spread out over 2 years. He's had injury issues. Arkansas was a mess as a team last year. There have been, you watch him, sometimes you question his motor, his willingness to not to stand in there and play a more physical contact kind of game, inconsistency on the glass at times. Offensively, he never really, but look, Arkansas's offense was a mess, and there were always issues with it. Defense was the bread and butter, even in the gravy years under Musselman. And so I don't lay all of it necessarily on Brazile. There's the other part of this, John Calipari. He may want a complete reset away from the previous regime, which means, I haven't seen up to this point, any kind of interest in retaining Arkansas players. That may continue. I'm just throwing out what I see remaining, coming back out of the portal, remaining as available players of a position of need. And so this isn't just a warm body. This guy was projected first team All SEC preseason. He was on some national award watch list. We know how the season went. We know he was nowhere near that kind of a player, but the potential's there. This is not a last resort type of talent just to fill a need. In my opinion, on what's still out there in terms of what Arkansas needs, talking about this kind of 4-spot player, next to Coleman Hawkins, he's my second best answer, despite all of the other stuff at this point. And I see plenty of reasons not to. I went through some of them, but I see some positives there. All right. Just from a positional standpoint, there may be a couple of players that are back into the college game out of the NBA draft that I would rate ahead of him, but not necessarily for the need he would fill. I'll start with Arthur Kaluma, 6'7" combo forward, a 3-4 tweener, the transfer from Kansas State, 3 years, 2 years at Creighton, transferred to Kansas State, up and down guy, 14.5 points, 7 rebounds. He is a strong rebounder as a 3-4. 34% from three on volume. So, that's good for if you're calling him a small ball four or helping you at the four. So there's some positives with Arthur Kaluma. One thing is he's a former 5-star coming out of that 2021 class of 2021. He was recruited by Calipari to Kentucky. That was a real recruiting pursuit there, and so there's already a relationship there. Is this a guy that if it's not Coleman Hawkins, would Arthur Kaluma be second on the list for John Calipari? I gave you my second on the list based on the guy that gives you length, height, and size on the front line and can help at the five if needed and bring some of that versatility. Kaluma's got plenty of versatility. He's not necessarily a guy I think that can help defend a five, and now to me it limits your matchup possibilities. The smaller you are with a 3-4 tweener, going from 1-3-4 tweener to a Duthero to having two doesn't make you taller or bigger in that spot. It just means it's one or the other guy. And then another player, Jameer Watkins, Florida State, also withdrew from the draft, just like Kaluma yesterday. Another very talented player, over 15, nearly 16 points per game. Good rebounder, 6 rebounds per game, nearly 3 assists. A guy that nearly 2 steals per game. He only played 29 minutes per game. You look at his production and his efficiency, but the production, when you look at the amount of minutes, he's producing better than guys that are playing in the mid to high 30s of minutes. Another 6'7", more of a wing in my opinion, but a quality player, and another guy that you could be on the court with him and maybe 3 guards or 2 guards and another wing and a big. So these are quality guys. There's more than one way to skin a cat. I think Arkansas needs more of a frontline presence, more of I won't call it a traditional 4, but size-wise, length-wise, even if it's a stretch 4 to some degree with some skill level, but can help you at the 5. Both Coleman Hawkins and Trevor Brazil each averaged over 1 block per game. On some level, they're adequate rim protectors as well. So what do you need? Arthur Kaluma and Jameer Watkins would certainly fill needs. So when I put this recruiting tracker update out, it's going to have Hawkins 1, Brazil 2, Kaluma 3, Jameer Watkins 4, just for those reasons. Wooga Poplar, the 6'5" guard from Miami, also withdrew from the draft. We saw that coming. We talked about it yesterday. He's set to take a visit next week when the dead period ends after the weekend. Next week, supposed to visit Oregon. There are reports out that Arkansas will likely or possibly get a visit, so we'll see. But it's another backcourt, a wing, 2 guard, a good player. 14 points per game last year, nearly just under 14, but a 38.5% shooter from 3. Checks that experienced guy. Helped Miami to a Final Four 2 years ago, so a lot of experience and winning experience. And then you look at the production and the 3-point shooting, you say, okay, I could see that. To me, Arkansas is, pretty well set in the backcourt. So to me, adding another piece means a couple of things. One is it's not just a luxury to have. You don't get a player like that with the possibility of maybe not having a big role. Does it affect someone else's role? I don't know. But if you're really stopping at 9 players in terms of A-list kind of guys, most of those guys are going to have some kind of a role. So you'd have another dynamic there in your backcourt. I still go back to Arkansas needs this 9th spot to be some kind of a frontline piece, even if it's a glorified 3-4 that leans more toward being a wing, but still gives you, at least a small ball 4 option that's not, a joke that, maybe you could really get by with that. Because the talent level on what Calipari's brought in is unquestionable. It's not about the talent. It's about you still have to have size and depth in certain places, and you've got good positional size throughout for the most part, but you don't necessarily have on that front line. You're thin there, in my opinion. So I go back, kind of repeating myself. All right, we're 24 minutes in. Other big news yesterday. This is not the lead, in my opinion, because I fully expected Nelly Davis to return and withdraw from the draft. It became a formality, and he announced yesterday that formally was withdrawing, but he was not invited to the draft combine. He declined to accept the invite to the G League Elite Camp that precedes the combine, with a chance to earn an invite to the combine if you do well at the Elite Camp. So he bypassed that. Reporting out there was at the time a few weeks ago that he would still do individual workouts with teams. Never saw any reporting on that. If someone else did, I missed it. I don't even know if he did that. So it was fully expected that he would be a Razorback. But to see it formally announced that he's actually withdrawn from the draft to beat the deadline is some news there. So Jonas Adu and now Nelly Davis fully expected. getting some comments here, and I always say I'm gonna try to do better, and then I do nothing to do better. I'm not close enough, and they fade off so fast. Oh man, I'm not a liar. My intentions are good there. I get to talking. All right, so we're going through some of these frontline options, and then Wooga Poplar. To me, those are the names. That's the five. Now there's other guys out there, which leads us to other interesting talking points here. Calipari said during a media scrum yesterday at the SEC spring meetings. I guess they're in Florida. Where are they? I don't know. But he said, he was asked some questions, obviously, in this little media scrum, and he starts talking about the roster. Some of the talking points were the same. And he got back to the 8 or 9 thing. He says, we're at 8. We need need to get to 9. I need one more, he said. I'm going to get one more. And then he started talking about positions of need. And, it's not like I'm some kind of a, savant. It was obvious what Arkansas still needed. He actually talked about positions of need. And it's the stuff we just covered. The frontline piece, he really wants that. Maybe another wing and shooting. He talked a little bit about that. So those were the things that could still be in play. But he went beyond 8 or 9 for once. Before he talked about maybe having walk-ons, but then he defined walk-ons during this media scrum, and he said walk-ons to him in this new era means players on full scholarship. Okay. They're not going to necessarily figure in his top 8 or 9, but there'd be additional players. He later in this scrum said maybe 2 or 3 more guys. He hasn't gotten there yet. That makes sense to me. First, you're figuring out who are you're getting to 8 or 9, and those are the guys that are your priority guys and the guys you're carving up NIL for. Because he went on to say with the walk-ons, he said full scholarship guys. And then he qualified that and said, old school scholarships, Pell Grants, camp money, ways to get there so that they're taken care of. But for NIL part, they'd have to be around and kind of earn an opportunity for NIL, I guess later next year. I don't know. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, if you can have 13 traditional scholarships, why would you do those other routes? And I realized I haven't looked at the new legislation or the new whatever is going on with the NCAA approving member institutions being able to, I guess, be capped at $20 million and what they kick in for NIL and different things like that. But I'm guessing the NIL pie, there'll be some legalities that it's got to be cut up for scholarship athletes. So if you went around scholarship athletes and didn't put them on a traditional athletic scholarship, that would be a workaround if you got them on Pell Grants and treat them like walk-ons in that sense, and got them the money so that they're not actually paying out of their own pocket to go to school. Now it's a matter of what do they need to do to get to a point where they go on a traditional scholarship and are also eligible for NIL money. That's a speculation on my part. That's the only reason I can understand why he went from walk-ons or full scholarship players and then start talking Pell Grants and camp money. Maybe that's the workaround. Maybe that's how you would do that so that you ensure that your top targeted 8 or 9 guys, you have more NIL pie to split amongst those guys. I don't know. I just, maybe I'm making that up, but that's where my mind went. I need to go back and see if I can learn more about, what entitlements do all scholarship athletes have, whether they're your top main guys that you're throwing NIL money out at, or where they would fit in a collective. To me, everybody gets something, but if there's a workaround by not putting them on a traditional athletic scholarship, maybe they're not always entitled to that. But if your program goes down that road and you explain it on the front end of players you're recruiting for those back end spots, then they know going in with their eyes wide open what they're agreeing to and what their goals are. So I'm not saying that's something nefarious at all. It may be a good model if that's what it is. But it's interesting to me, when I hear that in his words, I could be off on that. I could be missing something. If I am someone, if there's a better take on it, I'm open to it because I'm not really sure. But I found that interesting. So it sounds to me like getting past that now. It sounds to me like after you get to the targeted 9 guys, you're still going to backfill for your roster. But what caliber of players? What level of players are we talking? Pulling some from high school. There's other portal guys out there. Most guys in the portal, I'm thinking, are expecting more than to be on a walk-on scholarship program where they're not getting any NIL. I mean, I just don't know what the vision for this is in terms of the reality of how you fill those spots. Going through that framework and through that model. If that's it. Again, I don't know if it is. 30 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Subscribe, like, share, send a balloon up, whatever, carrier pigeon, tell somebody. We bring the content because we like doing it. We love covering Arkansas Razorbacks basketball. Our content over at HogvilleNET, Hogville.net on the website. Most of the talking points and things we cover here, we have written articles and keep things updated there. So always feel free. And we're also on Facebook, by the way. So you can check us out there on our Facebook page. But getting back to this and some of Calipari's talking points, I find it very interesting that now that we know there should be an expanse beyond 9 players, and we've talked about who Arkansas should be targeting if they can. Some of these names to me they seem obvious to me at this point. These are the best options out there. I mentioned Ugonna Onyenso. Could he still be some back if things don't work out and Arkansas is outbid for guys that it just won't raise the asking price, that just won't meet asking price on? Would he be a guy that Arkansas would throw some NIL money at to have another frontline piece? I'm not sure about that. I don't know, because I think there's too many similarities to what he brings to the table and guys like Big Z and Jonas do. I mean, now you're crowded at the 5 spot. You really didn't get help at the 4, and you still got some issues there. So I would say no on that. But you just never know. So I circle back to that a little bit to leave a door cracked on who knows. There's some other guys, frontline guys that can help at the 4 spot that have been in the portal. And I'm not going to go through those names right now, other than to say there are some potential players out there if you didn't get any of these names that we went through. I went through 5 or 6 there if you include Onyenso 6. All right, so let's talk about the schedule a little bit. Calipari dropped a little nugget, said he's got games. He didn't say who the opponents were, but Arkansas will play games in Dallas, non-conference, obviously. Dallas, Madison Square Garden, which is New York City, obviously, the Mecca. Little Rock, which that's an annual thing, that's traditional. So that's not something new. We don't know the opponents yet, but remember, Little Rock games are not even considered neutral site games. They are in reality, but in terms of net and how the NCAA views it, in terms of its analytics for your postseason resume, it's considered a home game, and so you don't get extra anything for that as a neutral site game. What would be interesting to know, obviously, opponents for all of these matchups. Remember also, Arkansas will be in the second year of the SEC ACC Challenge. And so Arkansas hosted Duke last year in year 1. So we assume, just like it was with the previous SEC Big 12 Challenge, you play home 1 year, you're on the road the next. That means Arkansas should be having a road game in this SEC ACC Challenge here in year 2. So that's part of your non-conference schedule. That'll be a matchup. I'm sure ESPN will make those matchups, and we'll find out about them soon enough. But the point is, when you're starting to talk about 2 games, Dallas and Madison Square Garden, and then your road game in the ACC SEC Challenge, that's at least 3 games that are considered away from home. One of them will be a true road game. And then he also mentioned in this conversation that he's working on finalizing a home and people call it home and home now. I always like home and away, because we're talking about your own school. You're going to play, if you have a series, one game will be at home, the other game will be away on the opponent's court. I call them home and away. It's how they were used to be referred to as, unless you're playing them on a neutral site like Arkansas did Oklahoma and Tulsa. But they're not talking about that. They're talking about a home and away series. And so then you wonder, okay, if you set that up, are you getting the first year at home, or are you getting the first year away? With the back end being home or away, I guess in year 2. Sometimes they space those out beyond the next season, but typically it's this year and would be the next. And then those things can even be home and away series that maybe renews after every 2 years. All right, we don't know those details or who these teams are for any of these, but it's a little bit more information. And so the mind starts to wonder and dream a little bit, who could some of these matchups be in Dallas? Who's Arkansas going to play in Dallas? Who's Arkansas going to meet up with Madison Square Garden? Kentucky, these games, these single games could be part of like a doubleheader. We've seen that if you're not in one of those MTEs where you're playing 2 or 3 games in a tournament format, 3 games in 3 days, or 2 games in 2 days. Sometimes you'll see these non-conference November, December matchups where you've got 4 teams and two single games for each school, or each school plays 1 game in a doubleheader. So does Arkansas have a one-off with 1 team, and that's the marquee matchup, and that's it, or will they be part of maybe a doubleheader? Those are things we'll find out more and more about. The Madison Square Garden one intrigues me. You could play anybody there. It doesn't have to necessarily be an East Coast school. It could be someone from the West Coast, Gonzaga, whatever. I mean, that could just be one of those things where they bring in 4 teams, you got 2 games, or does Arkansas again have a one-off against some nationally known program? Same with Dallas. Again, that brings up a lot of, both situations make me wonder what other format is around it, or are they just simply meeting a team and it doesn't have some big national branding package around it. Those will be interesting things to find out. And if you're playing in Dallas, I guess you could be playing be a road game against one of the, SMU, TCU would be Fort Worth, but you could use Dallas, DFW, I guess, loosely, and it could. So I still wonder about that stuff. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. It is what it is. We don't know the team matchups yet. But he did cite those things without. So then I also wonder, is that it in terms of playing away from Fayetteville and Bud Walton Arena? Because really, if you're going off what he said, potentially you've got no more than, I guess that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no more than 5 games off campus. You can have 13 non-conference games. So that would leave you with 8 true home games in Fayetteville, I guess. Is, no fewer than 8 if there aren't other off-site neutral or road games in the works. He just referenced, and maybe they've only gotten as far as that, so he doesn't even know yet, beyond a potential home and away series, Dallas, Madison Square Garden, and Little Rock, which will count as a home game, but it is off campus. And then the ACC SEC Challenge, where I do expect Arkansas to be on the road. All right, so we kind of hit some things there. We're still waiting on some coaching announcements. We know the first 3 main assistant coaches, 2 of them associate head coaches, and Kenny Payne, Chin Coleman, Chuck Martin as an assistant coach, then Brad Calipari named as an assistant coach. We know Bruiser Flint's on the staff because he's been on the road where I was at the Adidas event 2 weekends ago. But no formal announcement on what his title is. And then there's Ronnie Brewer Jr., who's been hanging out. Caliporky Bacon Stinks. Man, the Kentucky fans are in the house. Thank you. I mean, you guys are so basketball articulate. You're, snobbing down your nose to look at us Arkansas folk. I appreciate that. Maybe we got something to say. I don't know, but thank you for being here. John Calipari is a lightning rod. He's been a lightning rod. For older fans that remember his days at UMass, he used to get into it with John Chaney, the Hall of Fame coach at Temple. I mean, some of that stuff, and I don't bring all this up. I'm just saying he's always been a lightning rod, love him or hate him. And his outlook and his philosophy on how to coach the college game, how to treat players, how to basically highlight players. He's one of the driving forces to where we are now with NIL and players being made a priority in the money game. So, at one point in time, some of those things may have been frowned upon. Some people may still do because it's just what's been ingrained in them. But I think he's been ahead of the game, by a couple of decades in some regards. So he's an innovator. He's an innovator, in my opinion, and he's a lightning rod as part of that. So I get it. And Kentucky fans, he was there 15 years and had a lot of great success there. But arguably the top program in college basketball all time. They've had eras and decades and coaches that have had great success. And so, the standard there, I guess they think it's higher than anywhere else. And the last few years, when you look at postseason, wasn't exactly living up to Kentucky standards or even what we would say would be Arkansas standards. So I get it. All right. So we're almost 40 minutes in. We've hit a lot of things today. I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time. The only thing I will circle back to is one thing. We talked about it yesterday. Another possibility for this next season would be a Will Riley. class of 2025 right now, 5-star guy. I just interviewed him over the weekend at Nike EYBL. Man, this guy's a star. He is at 6'8", just a super versatile. He is picture perfect of what you see now in the NBA in terms of 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" players who can stretch the floor shooting the three. Very cerebral floor game. It's not about just being able to shoot. It's not just about being a catch and shoot guy. He's got real craft to create off the bounce and set up not only 3-point shots, but to read defenders, and how defenses are trying to adjust to him and make the right play off of that. Whether that's driving to a mid-range or getting all the way to the basket, he can go left or right. Or when he sees a numbers advantage because they're gapping too hard to stop him, he'll make the right play. So the very skilled, talented guy. He's got Arkansas in his Final Five. He's already visited Arizona. I mentioned this. It looks like he's going to visit Kentucky early in June, so maybe next week. Potentially Alabama before or after that. So he might squeeze in 2 visits pretty quickly is what the reporting is. And then Arkansas, the other options, the Professional League NBL over in Australia for a year. So Will Riley, Arkansas may be later in June. That's been reported. He told me that when I interviewed him and I put this out on Twitter, by the way, the video of this interview, but he said, yeah, he's going to visit Arkansas a little bit later. So that's his plan. You know how that goes. I mean, he could go on other visits and decide to commit elsewhere, or Arkansas may get the last visit. Either way, he's a guy that's looking to reclass, very strong likelihood that he'll reclass to 2024, which would make him part of another 5-star in Arkansas's freshman class. It bumps him up to the 2024 class from 2025 if he elects to do that. And so that would be another possibility. If you were looking at Igor Demin, a 6'8" combo guard out of Russia who just committed to BYU as a final piece of your top 9, then you weren't 100% married to you needed a front court piece, although there's quality ones there. Now that guys have announced that they're back in school, maybe Arkansas full court presses that 4 spot, but they've already shown based on the fact that they were looking at Igor Demin that they're willing to also pursue for that quality on the wing. So we go back to Will Riley. Would he be someone that Cal would try to help get to that reclassification to be part of this first roster? That's an interesting angle and a possibility. So we wanted to cover that really quickly. If I've missed anything, we'll come back and report it. I always notice sometimes I go back and watch portions of this and try to get through it because they're so long, and I misspeak all the time. Yesterday I was talking about Coleman Hawkins having his best season last night at Illinois, and I meant last year. I was talking about high school players, and I was talking about the Arkansas kids, and I said Jacob Lanier, class of 2026, has 5-star qualities. I said, as does and I was thinking about someone I just talked about from 2025, Terrion Burgess, TB, but I said, as does Trevin Brazil, TB. I said Trevin Brazil. I meant Terrion Burgess. So some of you are gracious and not pointing out some of my speaking errors. I guess it's approaching old age. But I wanted to clean some of that up if it confused anybody. All right, I'm going to cap it before we get to 45 minutes. Thank you for joining me. Love bringing the content. One last plea, subscribe, like, share. Thank you for joining us at HogvilleNET. If something, YouTube Live, if something breaks, we're going to go live again. So I did a 2 lives in one day on Sunday when DJ Wagner committed that it went public that his commitment had made it publicly. I came back on. We'll do it again if it's necessary today. We'll probably be back on early tomorrow for updates if we have any. If not, we may not. But until next time, I'll see you then.